Has David Moyes made up his decision on Calvin Phillips? Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the West Ham Network. This is your West Ham Daily. If you haven't already, go and check out Russ's video this morning. A very interesting topic of conversation related to the shares and the potential sale of shares with regards to West Ham, David Sullivan, Kretinsky, you name it. It's all covered in the show from early on from Russ. Now, if you're new around here, please make sure you do hit that subscribe button. Please, of course, hit the thumbs up. Leave a comment. Please leave a comment. It really does give us some really nice feedback. We'll try to engage with your comments as much as we possibly can. If you're interested in becoming a channel member, then hit the channel membership option, which says join when you look on the screen, and we enter you into monthly draws. Honestly, I think we must give away so much. I love it. It's such a good option for you guys as well. But I'm here to talk to you about one thing and one thing only, and that is Calvin Phillips. Now, listen, when West Ham brought Calvin Phillips in, I was, and I'll hold my hands up, quite excited about the prospect of bringing him in. However, what's transpired hasn't been exactly what me and possibly some of you thought. Now, what I am thinking with regards to Calvin Phillips is that possibly he came to West Ham 1 year too late, because even when he was playing for England at the height of his career, even when he wasn't starting many games for Manchester City and he was being included in the England squads, we were always, as West Ham fans, very keen to see and understand why Calvin Phillips would maybe play and be selected for the England squad every month, every time the England squad was announced, and sometimes playing games in or over Declan Rice at the time when Declan Rice was, of course, at West Ham. So we took a keen interest in Calvin Phillips. We've been linked to Calvin Phillips for a long time before obviously getting the deal over the line to bring him in on loan. Now, nobody can deny at all that so far this has not worked out. Now, David Moyes obviously was a huge fan of Calvin Phillips and his qualities, and he could have joined us before he did go to Manchester City, and I think hindsight's a wonderful thing. If Calvin Phillips knew what was going to go on, then really I think he probably didn't make the right move. He's one of those players that goes down in history as, you know what, maybe for his career in terms of winning things, but not necessarily to prolong his career, because it seems to be that the move to Manchester City has potentially not helped his career in football. Some have even said it's gone to ruin his career in football, and he has looked painfully off the pace at West Ham since joining us. He's hardly played any football over the last year and a half, and that's understandable, but maybe David Moyes thought he could get the best out of a Calvin Phillips. But the problem you've got now with Calvin Phillips is we're at the results end of the business. So bringing in a player like Calvin Phillips, yeah, okay, it gives us strength and depth, but I genuinely don't believe it is possibly now the relevant signing we should have made. And even if it is the relevant signing we should have made, it's not going to transpire well for a player like Calvin Phillips, because he doesn't desire and doesn't have exactly what, say, for example, Alvarez has got in the middle of the park. Now, of course, Alvarez will be missing for the first leg of the Europa League quarterfinal tie against Bayer Leverkusen. Join Alex on his TikTok takeover later on, where he'll be discussing everything in relation to the Alvarez suspension for that massive game for West Ham. And that could provide Calvin Phillips with an opportunity to come into the team. I'm not sure that he would be ready for such a big occasion, but reports are potentially suggesting that David Moyes potentially has made his decision on Calvin Phillips, and he is performing a U-turn with relation to Calvin Phillips, because he's not featuring to the level that we may have thought he would have. And the emergence again of Souček, you've got Alvarez, you've got James Ward-Prowse now being rested for games or dropped for games and coming in as a substitute appearance at the latter end of the games. Now, he is an expensive player, Calvin Phillips, and for West Ham to make the move in the summer, so far, there is no chance West Ham are going to make that move. And that's because apparently David Moyes is lining up another move for another player, and that player is this player here, Mandela Keita of Leuven in Belgium. We're understanding that West Ham have got new systems in place which are looking at the Belgian market. That's the market we're keen on looking at, and this player could be one of those players. Now, join me for the Hammers headlines, where I'll be discussing him in depth a little bit more, so I will leave that one for the Hammers headlines. But if Moyes really isn't keen on signing Phillips permanently, it would really represent a massive turnaround from his previous stance. And even though Calvin Phillips is not match fit, he has been poor when he has been given a chance by David Moyes. I really want any West Ham player that signs for the club to do really well, not just for the club, obviously, but for himself, and to be given a chance to develop and become the player that we once know he was. And we do know that there is absolutely a player there, but I feel like he's the player that needs to maybe go to a club that has the fight, the desire to, and will guarantee him game time, because he's not going to get that game time at West Ham. The difference between him getting game time and not is hitting the ground running, and that's something he hasn't done since he's been at West Ham. I'd love for him nothing more than to do that, and I don't think this is set in stone, but when you start to weigh up the options, how much he's paid per week, how much Manchester City will want to recoup some of their money, I don't see West Ham paying much money for Calvin Phillips. And if we are going to try and make a deal and make it permanent, you're going to be looking for a really cut price on the player. And I don't see Manchester City letting him go. But I think there's going to be a kind of a clashing of heads when it comes to Manchester City and Calvin Phillips come the end of this current season, because he will want to go on and progress his career, and he will know and understand that what's currently happening at Manchester City is not an option. And it's a shame, because I've listened to him on podcasts, and he seems to be such a humble guy. He seems to be such a humble player, and I do think the best player could be there could be a better version of him in terms of on the park there. But I think the project with West Ham so far hasn't worked, and unless some miraculous thing happens between now and the end of the season, then I don't see this one turning around. But I think Calvin Phillips probably will look back to that Manchester City decision and think that probably wasn't the best long-term solution for him at that moment. However, the problem you've got is with when you've got the powerhouses, the heavyweights of the footballing world come in for you, it's hard not to turn your head, and it's hard not to look at them, and it's hard not to say I've not worked under the best coach in the world. But what you don't want to have on your CV is I've been there for 2 years, I've been there for 18 months, and I've only played 300 minutes in total for that team. You don't want that against your name, and with all due respect, Scott Carson, fair play to you, mate, fair play doing what you're doing till end of your career, all that sort of stuff. But Calvin Phillips is 28. Again, it could be early days to make that judgment, but we've got some big games because we're still fighting for positions in the Premier League. We've still got the quarterfinals against Bayer Leverkusen to take up. Alvarez will be missing, of course, for that game, but I don't see Calvin Phillips becoming that natural successor to him for that game. I think there's other options in the team. What do you think? Put it in the comments and let me know. Do you think David Moyes has made up his decision or not on Calvin Phillips? And what would you do if you were David Moyes? Because we've got so much uncertainty coming this summer. The uncertainty is we don't actually know if David Moyes will be the manager for West Ham. We've got a lot of out-contract players, including, of course, Calvin Phillips. So big decisions are going to be made for West Ham either way. And we then will know the direction of where the club is going. But I don't see Calvin Phillips being part of the long-term plans with West Ham. You let me know. Put it in the comments below. Take it easy, everyone. And, of course, join us for the Hammers headlines later on. Come on, you Irons.